Hello, everybody. It's really an honor to be able to introduce our speaker this evening. I can't imagine a better person for this group. John Schnur is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of New Leaders for New Schools. He led the development of the organization's strategy, management team, board, core values, performance metrics, partnerships, and fundraising. And I think that's just about everything that you need to do to create an organization like this. As you can see, he's a perfect speaker for this evening and for this event, having demonstrated all of the skills and also the value of the very skills that the students who are involved in the business of education are developing at Stanford. Now, I have a lot of information about New Leaders for New Schools. But under John's leadership, the organization has become so well known in education circles, it's unimaginable to me that there is anyone here who doesn't know what it does. And if you don't, pull out your iPhone and Google it, because I'm not going to tell you. I will say that New Leaders for New Schools is currently partnering with major urban school systems and charter schools in 12 communities, all the way from Baltimore to our own Bay Area and a lot of places in between. Currently, over 640 new leaders serve more than 220,000 students, more students than are served by all but a handful of urban districts in the United States. Not only does New Leaders for New Schools provide direct services and has influenced lives, both adults and children, very directly, but it also is a model of a very different way of developing leadership skills and school leaders than we have had in the past. And I think the organization has really been an inspiration for those of us who have been searching for some alternatives to the status quo, which I think everyone probably here would agree has not been working very well. So it has also been a model and an inspiration, as well as in charting new territory and being creative about new strategies, as well as being an extraordinarily successful and influential organization. So just a little bit about John. From September 2008 to June 2009, John took leave from New Leaders for New Schools to serve as an advisor to Barack Obama's presidential campaign, and as a member of the president's transition team, and as a senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan. Before founding New Leaders for New Schools, John served as special assistant to Secretary of Education Richard Riley, as President Clinton's White House Associate Director for Education Policy, and a senior advisor on education to Vice President Gore. He's developed national policies from preschool to higher education, focusing on a broad array of topics: teacher and education quality, reforming urban school systems, charter schools, after-school programs, and early learning in preschool. John is someone who has extraordinary depth and also extraordinary breadth. He has lots of degrees from lots of very distinguished places. Don't need to go into those details, because not nearly as important as his degrees is the fact that last September his wife Elisa delivered their third child, Philip Nathan, who joined his 5-year-old brother Matthew and his 2-year-old sister Elizabeth. John clearly has a very full plate with family and at the same time improving American education. So we're doubly grateful to him for taking the time to share his experience and wisdom with us this evening.
It's so nice. Dean, thank you so much for your leadership. Stanford, in part because of your leadership, is one of the centers of entrepreneurial and evidence-based thinking and practice in education in the country. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for all of you for being part of this community. I am so thrilled to be here. I'm going to tell you why, and I'll lay out why I think we are at one of the most pivotal periods of American history right now, and what's happened in the last few years to get us here, what the short-term and long-term future may look like, and why I really so deeply believe that those of you in this room and colleagues of yours around the country are going to be at the center of whether we seize or squander this historic opportunity we've got for our kids. And in this case, it is true. I sort of voted with my feet by coming tonight because, especially now, as those of your parents know, I've got 3 young kids, and I came out this morning and taking a red-eye back tonight to the East Coast. And there aren't many things I would do that for, but to speak with people who are at the cusp of thinking about education and management and business, and how strategically and grounded in what we know about education can drive our sector of education forward, our schools forward. Again, I think you're the key to our success, and so in a second I said, when you guys asked if I'd come out, I said of course I would, because I really believe you're it. So let me tell you what I feel like I can do tonight. In some ways I feel like at my best I may be a translator of spending time in, oh there you go, it's a translator of between the world of policy and strategy and education and of practice. I think there are better people, way better than I am, at practice in education, the classroom at school level, and there are people who are better than I am in the policy and world of politics. But I try to spend time trying to help translate what actually is happening in schools and classrooms, and what are the implications for policy and systems change, and then spending time a lot in the policy and world of politics and saying, okay, here's what's happening, and for those people who are trying to drive practice, here's what the context. And so I'm trying to play that role of translator tonight to help maybe equip you with a little bit more of information as you do play your leadership role individually and as a community. The question was, what would it take to scale to get success to 50 million kids? And I'll take that. There's a new leaders from your schools element of that, but this, essentially to scale to 50 million kids, that's the same question, is what's it going to take for us to scale success for all of our kids across the country? I think that is the fundamental driving question here. Let me talk a little bit, start with that, and where I think we are now, and what some of the assets and challenges are to get from where we are now to that kind of success, and in so doing, try to answer some of your specific questions. But I would start by saying that we are in an age where we know, but it's worth repeating, that the number one civil rights issue of our time and the number one economic competitiveness issue of our time is really having quality education for all of our kids, very much including our kids who've been historically underserved, our kids in poverty, our kids of color, our kids who are English language learners, kids with disabilities, kids who've not had the educational support needed today. And we have 2 achievement gaps in this country. One is where we are as a country versus the rest of the world overall, and one is where our kids who are the furthest behind are from where they can be and need to be. And these 2 gaps are inextricably linked. We can't solve one without solving the other. It's never been more important, both because our economy, as you well know, has changed fundamentally. We have school systems today that largely were designed to meet the needs economically of the industrial age, with a school schedule that was designed to meet the needs of the agrarian age. And the industrial age, we needed a few kids to be educated at high levels, and most kids to be educated at relatively low levels, to get a 3rd and 4th grade level of education, and then be able to have the skills that they needed in order to be able to get decent paying jobs and raise a family and become active members of the community. And our system, with all of its inequities, all of its issues, largely designed 100 years ago, met those needs. We actually succeeded in educating a few kids at high levels and most kids at low levels, and met many of the economic needs, if not the social justice needs of our time. My great-grandfather was one. I knew him well. He died at 97. He immigrated from Europe at the turn of the last century, and he came to Milwaukee, got a 3rd grade education, had what he needed in order to be able to get a decent job, start a little company, and really be successful. I then met kids who grew up in the neighborhood that he grew up in, who achieved about a 3rd grade level of education by the time they were in 8th or 9th grade in the Milwaukee public schools 70 years later, and their opportunities were absolutely closed to them because they had the same level of education that he had maybe 80 years before. So we've got this economic imperative where most of our fast-growing industries have jobs that require at least high school education and really some post-secondary education as well. And we have a complicated, an increasingly complicated society and information age where just to master life as a citizen, we need higher levels and higher levels of education and skill. So the needs have changed dramatically. And the problem we basically have is that our school systems have not come anywhere close to catching up to those. Some people would say our education system has failed, that we once had some glory day that we fell from. It's not true, actually. This one data point will help illustrate this. It is true 30 or 40 years ago that the U.S. was #1 in the world in high school and college completion rates. And today we've slipped to the middle of the industrialized nations. And so we have gone from being first in the world to the middle of the world, and we're dropping. But people who would defend the status quo in education say, it's not true, we haven't gotten worse, and that's right. The actual absolute levels of high school completion rates and college completion rates, for example, have not gone down in the last 30 or 40 years. They haven't gone up. They haven't gone down. The issue is the rest of the world is moving ahead in order to prepare themselves and their kids for this century and this economy. And the demands for our kids have gone up. So we've stayed the same while the demand and the need is going way, way up, and the gap is growing dangerously large because we're just standing still, not getting worse, not getting better. So in this context, question of what's possible, I think, is driven by, and what it's going to take to get to success is driven by what's needed. We fortunately have economic imperatives, we have social justice imperatives, we've got competitiveness imperatives, and the evidence at the school level that's been created in the past 10 to 15 years, which is one of the most significant positive developments of our time, has been now we have absolute proof that kids in poverty, kids who've been underserved, can and do achieve at high levels when we adults get it right, with the right level of high expectations, the right kind of teaching, the right kind of school culture, the right kind of relationships. We have many of them, it's a disproportionate number of charter schools that are, although there are a lot of bad charter schools. There are a lot of district schools, school system schools that are getting these results. They're not as well branded, but they are, and there are a lot of district schools that aren't. But we have these individual school level proof points that show our kids can achieve at very high levels, essentially refuting the way that people interpreted the Coleman report from the 1960s. People understood that to mean that essentially poverty would drive educational outcomes. We actually see that when we adults get it right, that education can be a major way to address and change poverty, that our kids can rise to that level of expectations and support that we provide to them. So the level of education that we are seeing at the school level afforded to kids, including kids who've been underserved, we know our kids can do now. We know it. It's not just an aspiration. And we have schools, Massachusetts is an example, Roxbury Prep School in Boston, some of you may have heard. This is a middle school in Boston that is on absolute levels is outperforming all of the non-selective middle schools across the state of Massachusetts. Overwhelmingly kids who are African American, overwhelmingly kids who are in poverty, and on an absolute level they are outperforming all of the affluent non-selective middle schools in the state of Massachusetts. It's in proof point, just as there are in this area, that our kids can do. But we as adults haven't done it, which is the challenge. How do we adults do it at scale is the central challenge of our time. But what success can look like, I would say 30 years from now, and that may seem too slow to people, but I think it's realistic at the national level, is where we can get 80, 90, 95% of our kids to the levels that our kids are achieving in now maybe 100 or 200 schools around the country, which would change everything in this country. It would have to make us a much fairer society, a much more competitive society. The question is, how do we go from a small subset of our kids today achieving at the levels they need to succeed in today's economy to 80, 90, 95+% is the goal, and is the goal for the next 30 years, and we can achieve it. What it will take to close the gap from where we are now, and a few data points would illustrate where we are. We now have 1 in 10 kindergartners who are low-income kindergartners who wind up graduating from college. We have the majority of our fourth graders who are from low-income families, and our fourth graders who are reading below a basic level. We have more than half of our low-income kids of color in many of our urban school systems around the country dropping out of high school before they ever get a diploma and don't get a diploma. So we have the proof points at school level, but systemically we're not there. How are we going to close the gap to get there? The assets, we've got some challenges. The first asset is what we know now from the evidence about what it takes to get these school level proof points. Basically, you know this, but there are several things that we're learning from the schools in very granular ways that are getting these dramatic successes. And you asked about school culture. One of the crucial elements of any school getting great results is creating a culture of high expectations for all kids, of a sense of personal accountability and responsibility of adults for kids' outcomes, and a sense of a blend of kind of structure and student conduct, which minimizes distractions, which is blended with a real sense of caring for kids. And that culture, that creates essentially a demand and opportunity for demand from students for learning and achievement is absolutely crucial. And we have learned so much from the schools that have done this about how you go in and do this in a school. And then the great thing is, it is completely replicable. There are some very specific steps. You can go on our website. There's a report called the Urban Excellence Framework Report that gives examples of this. We've got documentation of how schools are doing this around the country. But there has never really been a scale effort to create that kind of culture and look at what are the barriers to doing that, which we could go into if we had more time. But the models are there at the school level. The question is, how do you take that culture to scale? The second thing we see in these school level proof points is a relentless focus on driving improvement of teaching and learning at every classroom every day, driven by data and driven by clear standards for what kids should know and be able to do by the end of each grade level. Now, you sort of hear about this, instructional leadership, improvement of instruction, but the practices that are emerging from the breakthrough gain schools, the high poverty, the high achievement schools, are very, very specific and very consistent, which I won't go into detail of, but the great news here is it's not like there's just some random one-off school or leader who just does these things that no one else could do. The patterns are unbelievably consistent about how do you actually drive a constant improvement of teaching and learning in the school level. That happens at the school level. Third, we have human capital approaches at the school level. People are recruiting great talent, they're retaining good talent, they're dismissing talent who shouldn't be there. They're creating leadership teams to drive effectiveness across the school. Again, very consistent practices that can be scaled. Fourth, we see operations and systems at the school level that institutionalize what you can't rely on individual leaders to stay and do, so you got to systematize it. And fifth, there's the personal leadership that we see at the school level, where people just walk the talk, exude the spine to stand up for what's right, while having the interpersonal skills to be able to pull people along and to be able to accomplish what a vision the leader has for what needs to be done. And we see those things done at the school level in a context where there's external accountability for closing achievement gap and latitude for people at the school level to make decisions. And you see consistently dramatic gains that really would surpass what people would have expected even 20 years ago our kids could achieve. So that is the most hopeful thing we've got. We've got our kids can do it. We've got consistency at the school level of what it takes to get there, and many of you know that well. And the challenge is we've never done it at scale. We've never taken those school level practices and taken it to scale in really school systems especially serving kids in poverty, to get those kind of dramatic gains in the school system. We've made incremental gains in school systems, but we've only had dramatic gains in pockets. But we have a lot of knowledge that we've learned from these schools. We've got increasingly politically courageous leaders at all levels who are willing to take on some of the challenges that are going to be needed to overcome some of the barriers to go from school level success to system success. Crucially, we've got a rising set of leaders in school systems, in nonprofits, in businesses, in politics, who really have come to understand this evidence. To say, you know what? We adults are accountable for delivering the kind of outcomes that our kids have achieved at small scale, and we're going to have to figure out how to remove all the barriers to that. And the presence of those leaders rising to increasing levels of power across sectors is an incredibly important factor in making me optimistic that we actually can close this gap, including, I'm biased, but including President Obama. Barack Obama in Chicago understood what an quality education meant. As he often says, education made me, he says, who I am, and made Michelle Obama who she is. On the campaign, he was willing to stand up both for more resources for education, but also more reform for education. At a time when the economy was in trouble in late '08, in the 3 debates he had, no one asked about education in the debates, but he kept coming back unsolicited to education as a key. We can't have a long-term economic recovery, he said, just through short-term economic stimulus. We're going to have to address the fundamentals that we need to ensure a better long-term economy. And I had the opportunity to see him as we were designing his education policies with him for the new administration. And he was an example, an important example of courage and leadership. And as an example, I'll tell you, we were sitting in the transition offices with him as we were designing some of the policy for the economic stimulus package. And we were debating what he could offer and options for him to consider and that. And we were in a lot of debates, about 10 people around the table in a pretty key meeting. And he stopped the debate in the middle of it. And this is the kind of leadership that I do see emerging in many places around the country. And he said, let me tell you 3 principles that I think should drive this debate and this discussion we're having. Number 1 is, I want all of this discussion on policy and change to focus on what's in the interest of children and what will get much better results for children. I don't hear any discussion right now about what adult interests or adult perspectives are. Our kids' interests trump. Second, he said, then once we figure that out, then let's figure out how to actually engage and invest adults in being able to support that. And he put his hand on David Axelrod's shoulders. That Axe is here not to tell us what to do, but how to get political support once we've agreed on what the policies are that'll be good for kids. And third is he said, let's not poke anyone in the eye while we do this. If we have differences, let's not critique someone. Let's advance and call for policies and let the differences emerge in terms of the difference on policy or strategy, but let's not attack somebody. And those principles changed the discussion entirely, ultimately led to his transition team, and I was part of it, his new Secretary of Education, proposing $100 billion out of $800 billion stimulus for education. $95 billion of which went to invest in education, averted 600,000 layoffs and job cuts in education, which unfortunately now I think we're going to hit again since that funding is running out, but nonetheless has at least staved it off for a couple years. In exchange for funding that he put in is very significant reform funding. And the most notable one, the most visible one, is this Race to the Top initiative that many of you have heard about, which essentially is letting states compete for billions of dollars if they adopt reforms that are based on the evidence that will take these school-level successes that I was describing to success system-wide and statewide. And essentially the 4 reforms based on the evidence that Race to the Top is calling for are number 1, and they detract completely from what those schools are doing at the school level. One is setting really high standards for all kids and having aligned assessments that measure kids' progress toward those standards that actually both are used to hold schools accountable and to improve instruction for kids. Secondly, is a focus on data, and like you talk about business, there's a lot of stuff in business that doesn't translate. One of the things that does is the use of data to drive improvement in good businesses. So how do we get data systems that have data that can drive the continuous improvement of teaching and learning, which we see individual schools doing, but right now having to recreate the wheel because we haven't created the systems at scale. The third reform, the most important one, the biggest criteria in Race to the Top, is what the research shows is the most important, is talent. Is a focus on really effective teachers and effective leaders. The research shows that 60% of the difference between schools and the progress that kids make across schools is the quality of the teacher and the quality of the principal. A third is the quality of the teacher, a quarter is the quality of the principal. Together, 60%. You can't have great teachers without a great principal because the principal recruits, attracts, retains, develops, holds accountable the teachers. So there's a big focus systemically on getting effective teachers and effective leaders. And fourth, there's a focus on turning around our worst achieving schools. And putting both the resources and dramatic policy change to ensure both greater accountability and autonomy over staffing and budget in order to drive improvements in low-achieving schools. And the Race to the Top initiative is part of America's Race to the Top to go from being in the middle of the pack to being back to number 1 in areas like college completion rates and high school completion rates and the gaps that exist in those areas between different groups in our society. And states are now competing for that. And in fact, as we see in state after state, not all states, people are standing up, political leaders, educational leaders, business leaders, in unusual coalitions and saying, you know what, most importantly, we want to do this because these are the right things to do. Let's pass laws, enact new policies that will address these 4 priorities because we believe it. But let's also not lose out on a chance to compete for hundreds of millions of dollars of federal funding. Let's not miss a chance to show the country that we can be part of the Race to the Top. And we are seeing unbelievable change happening now in state legislatures, at state departments of education, which is changing the context in education in a way that will make it possible for some of these school-level successes to go to scale. Colorado this week is an interesting example. Colorado is about to pass, maybe did pass today, with bipartisan support, legislation that would overhaul the education, the teaching and school leadership profession in Colorado. It would invest more funding in raising pay, it would invest more money in driving professional development for teachers, but it also would make education more accountable, and it would make it easier to dismiss teachers who are low performing. It has a policy that if teachers are ineffective for 2 years, who are tenured teachers, they would lose their tenure. It would make it possible when they're in a layoff situation that people when school systems are trying who to lay off, to take effectiveness ahead of seniority in deciding who to lay off. One of the challenges we've got right now is we're going to lay off people because this funding's running out. We're often going to lay off some of the best teachers because we do it in seniority, not in terms of effectiveness. This blend of accountability and development for educators is getting enshrined in legislation like in Colorado that, if executed on, can help these school-level successes become systemic. Which then gets to, with political courage and educational leaders taking school-level success to system success, you ask then about what are the key levels to make change at in education. And I would say there's basically, I would argue, this is my perspective, not the Obama administration's perspective, but 3 key areas to make change, in my view, in the next 5 years, to lay the groundwork for the more sweeping change that can over time get us to a quality education for all kids in this country. One is absolutely at the classroom and school level, creating more and more classroom and school proof points. We need in every community across the country, we need more examples of classrooms and schools where all kids are achieving high levels. Anybody who is considering becoming a teacher or going back into teaching or is teaching, stay there, go back into it. There's nothing that's more important. If you want to become a principal, you ask what we're looking for in terms of new leaders. It's on our website, but we look for 4 things. We look for people who believe that all kids can learn at high levels, who believe that adults should be accountable for kids' outcomes, who are relentless in their approach to solving problems and making change. And the belief system that comprises the belief system we're looking for. We look for people, secondly, who know good teaching, who therefore can be good instructional leaders to improve the quality of teaching in the school level. Third is people who know how to inspire and lead adults, who have a track record in doing that in whatever way, in professionally or in your civic life. And fourth, we look for people who've got certain kind of analytic and problem-solving skills. And if you are fired up then to spend many years for the long term, not the short term, to be part of a community of leading schools, we'd love you to apply or nominate a new leader. So the classroom and school level is one huge area. And anybody who's there, stay there. Anybody who wants to go back or go there, go. But the second level, maybe the newest one, that is hugely important, which we have never had the chance to do, because of the school level successes coming up, and because of the political courage and the policy in a way sort of coming down or coming from the policy world, the chance to go to school system level success is unprecedented. I think in the next 5 years, maybe the most important thing that will happen in America is we'll go from hundreds of school level proof points to maybe 15 school system level proof points. In 5 years, 7 years, if we can say, you know what, systems like Charlotte, North Carolina, New Orleans, Denver, Washington, D.C., hopefully something in California, are creating examples of what kind of dramatic achievement is possible at scale. We will then know that not only can our kids do it, but we'll know that our adults can do it at scale. And then we'll have both the inspiration and the knowledge about how to take that to national scale. The third of the 3 areas that I would say we could make big change in on the assessments you asked about is around the student assessment. And there is a huge need to vastly improve the quality of assessments in this country. I don't have time to go into detail on this, but we got a big problem here. We need good assessments to drive instruction. We've got bad assessments now. I think the most hopeful thing we've got is that there are states coming together to compete for $350 million in federal funding to create a new core of college-ready, career-ready, really high-quality assessments that really measure whether kids are on track to success in college or careers. That will both be used for accountability and provide really useful information about whether kids are making progress toward what we care about. But I'd say that area of assessment is probably the third in the short term. So I think classroom and school level, school system level, assessment level, if in 5 years we can say we got basically 500 school level proof points, 15 school system proof points, a new benchmark in this country for what it means to actually be successful, embedded in good assessments that are used, I think at that point we'll say not that we've succeeded in education in America, but we're then ready to take it to the next level. We're then ready to leverage technology to really change the way systems work more fundamentally. We're ready for the more fundamental political and policy change that we need. We'll be ready with many more people who've been part of those efforts, who will then be the leaders of education for the next couple decades to come. And I really think with those proof points, the political courage, and most of all, the talent, I hope every one of you in this room who are in or considering going into or going back into education will spend your lives on it, because the live or die question is we have enough people who go in and stay in order to provide the talent to both get these successes the next 5 years, but then take us to a point in 20 to 30 years that we can get to the point which I will end on, that I expect we will get to. But we may not if we don't work at it and stay focused on it, and people really devoting their lives to it. Get to the point when our kids, I've got 3 young kids, when maybe their kids will look at me, and our kids and grandkids will look at us and say, you mean urban education, rural education in this country wasn't successful at one point? Why was that? Why was it so hard to get this to be successful when we've got all the cultural capital, all the financial capital, all the human capital, all the knowledge? Why was that so hard to make this successful? And I think when we reach that point in 30 years, we can say, okay, we've advanced this next chapter of the civil rights movement in our country, and we will then bequeath to our kids and grandkids the greatest possible gift we can so that they can then take on the challenges of their time. I think whether we get there or not will depend on thousands of individuals, tens of thousands of individuals applying whatever skills you've got. If I can help you in leveraging your skills for that purpose, I would be delighted to. Truly, anybody, if you want to email me, put it in the subject header, put met at Stanford conference. I'm at jschnur@nlns.org, and I will have somebody in my team try to help find ways for you to connect to other people who can leverage opportunities for you. I think the success of our country comes down to this. The success of education comes down to you and other colleagues, and I really hope we'll be working at this for the next 3 decades together. So thank you very much, and let me turn it over to the organizers.